The sun had only just started rising over the wide stretch of land when the man who owned the ranch stepped outside, the cup of coffee in his hand. He liked the quiet mornings out here, the soft way the light touched the hills, and the quiet hum of nature that reminded him why he moved so far from the busy neighborhoods he used to know. After years working long hours in a career that demanded constant attention, he finally wanted peace. A ranch, open space, and a little distance from people who liked telling other people what to do. That was all he hoped for. He had lived on the ranch for a few months when the first strange thing happened. It started with footprints. Not animal tracks or tire marks, but small shoe prints on the dirt trail that ran along the fence line. At first, he thought they might belong to hikers or kids from the nearby subdivision cutting across the land. He didn't pay much attention. The land was big, and seeing signs of wandering people seemed harmless. The ranch itself didn't belong to any neighborhood organization. It sat just outside the border of a housing development where homes looked almost identical and the yards were trimmed the exact same way. He had chosen the ranch exactly because it was free from that sort of thing. No committees, no bylaws, no colorful newsletters taped to doors reminding people. Their garbage cans were visible for 3 minutes too long. Then one morning, as he checked the fence near the edge of his property, he saw a woman standing there, not just near it, but inside the property line. She wore a bright sun hat, carried a clipboard tucked under her arm, and had the sort of expression that announced she was about to correct something. Even if she hadn't decided what yet, he walked toward her slowly, not wanting to startle her, but also wondering what she was doing. When she noticed him, she straightened her posture and looked him over as if she were the one who lived there. "Good morning," he said, keeping his tone friendly. "Can I help you?" "Yes," she replied, as though she had been waiting for him to ask. "I'm checking for compliance issues. Your trailer is visible from our community walking path. That doesn't meet the standards." He blinked, unsure if he heard her right. Compliance to what? "This is private property." She waved her hand like brushing away a gnat. "The HOA standards for our community. We maintain a certain look, and that includes the areas people can see from common routes. Your trailer is out of alignment with that." She spoke as if she were reading from an invisible rule book. The man took a slow breath. "I'm not part of your HOA. This ranch isn't under your authority." She lifted her chin. "If the community sees it, it's part of our visual environment. And we have standards." He stared at her for a moment, trying to decide if she was joking or one of those people who believed rules applied wherever they personally wanted them to. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you're trespassing. I need you to step back off the property." The woman huffed in disbelief. "Trespassing? Oh, please. I'm here for everyone's benefit. You should be thanking me for catching this before it becomes a fine." He didn't want an argument. The last thing he wanted was conflict. "Please step off the property," he said again, still calm. "I'm not part of your HOA, and you really shouldn't be entering private land without permission." She pressed her lips together, narrowed her eyes at him, and then walked toward the border fence with stiff steps. "I'll be watching for changes," she said without turning around. He didn't answer. Instead, he made a mental note to keep an eye out. He thought maybe she had simply misunderstood. Or maybe someone in her community had given her the wrong idea about the land next door. He hoped that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. A few days later, he found her again. This time, she was taking pictures of the old truck he parked near the barn. The sun was high, and there she was, snapping photos and writing notes, as though conducting a full inspection. "What now?" he asked, a little more tired than upset. She turned with a practiced smile. "Your vehicle placement is irregular. It should be stored in a fully enclosed structure if it can be seen from the community." He had to laugh. He couldn't help it. This is a ranch. People leave trucks outside on ranches. It's not this close to a managed subdivision, she countered. And certainly not when the vehicle looks ... aged. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Please stop coming onto my land. You have no right to enforce anything here. I'm being patient, but this needs to stop." Her eyebrows lifted like she couldn't believe he was addressing her that way. "You're being defensive. That's usually a sign of non-compliance." Before he could respond, She marched off again, muttering something about having to handle everything herself and people who didn't respect neighborhood quality. Days passed, then a week. He thought maybe she had moved on to bother someone else. But early one morning, discovered she had pushed open the simple wooden gate he used to block off the old service road leading deeper into the property. It wasn't locked then, just closed. He found her standing halfway down the trail, hands on hips, staring at the brush pile he had gathered from a recent clearing project. "What now?" he asked again, though this time his patience was noticeably thinner. She pointed at the brush pile as though discovering something illegal. "You can't leave debris out in the open. It attracts pests and lowers the community's visual appeal." "I'm cleaning up the land," he said. "There's nothing wrong with that. Not in this manner," she shot back. "You should have submitted a cleanup plan for approval." He rubbed his forehead, suddenly realizing she believed she had jurisdiction over every inch within sight of her neighborhood. "There is no approval process for my property. I don't answer to your HOA." She folded her arms. "Everyone answers to the HOA if they care about the community." He took a slow breath. "Ma'am, you're going to leave now. And this gate will be locked from here on out." She looked offended. Again, that signature reaction she seemed to have prepared for every situation. Locking it would prevent community access. "That's not allowed." "There is no community access," he replied firmly. "There never has been. This road is mine. This land is mine. And you cannot keep walking onto it." For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she shook her head in pure frustration, turned around, and stomped away like a person heading straight for a customer service desk to demand a manager. That was the moment he knew things weren't going to end simply. People like her didn't back down easily. They didn't like being told no, didn't like losing imaginary authority. And they definitely didn't like being reminded of rules that applied to them instead of others. He closed the gate behind her once she finally left. The next morning, he installed a new lock. It was nothing fancy, just a sturdy chain and a reliable padlock. Enough to keep out someone who thought wandering anywhere she pleased was her personal right. He didn't want to escalate things, but he had a responsibility to protect his land. He hoped. Sincerely, that was the end of it. But the following week, he received an envelope taped to his door. Not mailed. Not delivered through proper means. Literally taped to the glass beside the front handle. It was a notice of violation printed with an HOA letterhead. The tone was harsh, the language stiff, and the list of required corrections longer than any reasonable person would take seriously. They listed the trailer, the old truck, the brush pile, the locked gate, even the height of his grass. He stood there reading it, shaking his head. The only thing written correctly was his name. He knew immediately who wrote it, and he also knew one other thing. This woman, this self-declared enforcer, had no idea who she was trying to push. Around, she had no idea he'd spent decades practicing law. She had no idea he had dealt with far more complicated and aggressive situations, and most importantly, she had no idea he wasn't about to let someone bully him on his own land. That notice wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The morning after he found the so-called violation notice taped to his door, the man stood in his kitchen staring at it again. Not because he believed any part of it was real, but because he wanted to fully understand what this woman thought she was doing. He had seen some bold behavior in his time, but this was something else. He set the paper on the table and poured himself coffee, hoping the warm drink would help him think. The house was quiet, filled with the soft ticking of a clock mounted near the back door. Quiet mornings were what he loved most about living so far out. Peace, stillness, space. But, there was someone who didn't respect that space. Someone who didn't seem to understand boundaries, physical or otherwise. He sat down and read through the letter again. It was written as if he were one of the homeowners inside the nearby subdivision. As if the HOA had any say over his land. As if the woman with the clipboard had authority beyond the lines she imagined on a map. There were demands, deadlines, and threats of fines. It was absurd. But what bothered him more was how confident she seemed in taking this approach. She hadn't even tried a conversation or asked questions. She went straight into policing a property that didn't belong to her. He let out a long breath. He didn't want to fight. Truly, he didn't. But people like her didn't stop unless someone stopped them. Later that afternoon, after finishing some work around the barn, he drove down to the main road leading into the subdivision. He wasn't going to confront her. He wasn't going to start anything. He simply wanted to talk to someone on the HOA board to clear things up before they escalated. When he arrived, he saw neat lawns, identical mailboxes, and houses that looked like copies of one another. Children played on the sidewalk while a few adults trimmed hedges with the careful precision expected in a place like this. He parked near the community office, small building near the entrance. Inside, a woman sat behind a counter, typing on a computer. She looked up when he approached. "Hi there," he said politely, holding the printed notice. "I'd like to speak to someone about this letter. I'm not part of your community, but I received it anyway." The woman took the paper, glanced over it, and frowned. "Where did you get this?" "It was taped to my door. I own the ranch that borders the back of the neighborhood." Her eyebrows rose. "Oh, that's odd. This isn't something we sent." She flipped through the pages, confusion deepening. "These aren't even official forms." He nodded calmly. "I thought as much. I believe someone from the community has been overstepping." She let out a slow sigh. "Let me guess. Short woman, strong voice, carries a clipboard everywhere." "That would be her," he said. The woman at the desk closed her eyes for a moment in a way that said she wasn't surprised at all. "She isn't on the board. She's a volunteer who takes the neighborhood rules very seriously. Too seriously sometimes. She's been warned before." He wasn't shocked. "Well, she's been coming onto my property repeatedly, taking photos, making demands. And now this." The woman shook her head. "I'm so sorry. She's not allowed to enforce anything beyond our property lines. And she certainly has no business sending letters like this. I'll let the board know immediately." "Thank you," he replied, genuinely relieved someone understood the problem. But even with the HOA itself dismissing her actions, he had a feeling she wouldn't stop simply because someone told her to. People like her rarely backed down just because they were wrong. On his drive home, he noticed something unusual. On the side of the gravel road leading to his ranch driveway, tire tracks veered off toward the fence-fresh ones. He slowed, studying them. The pattern didn't match his truck tires. When he parked at the ranch and walked the fence line, he found the gate he had locked was still shut, but mud on the ground showed footprints again, smaller than his. She had been there, probably earlier that day. He didn't know if she came to snoop, take more pictures, or check whether he was fixing things. But it was clear she wasn't stopping. Even after she taped the violation notice on his door, for the next few days, he kept to his normal routine, feeding the animals, repairing fences, clearing brush. But every time he walked the property, he looked twice, checking for signs of her, and he always found something. Sometimes the gate looked touched. Sometimes fresh footprints appeared near the edge of the property. Once he found the lock scratched as if someone had tugged on it. Finally, one bright afternoon, he caught sight of a figure just beyond the tree line near the northern boundary. A woman, wearing the same sun hat, the same clipboard tucked under her arm. He didn't yell. He didn't make a big scene. He simply walked toward her. She saw him coming and hesitated not enough to leave, just enough to show she knew she wasn't supposed to be there. "Are you lost again?" he asked, his tone even. She straightened her shoulders. "I'm here to check on the corrections I listed in my notice." "There's nothing to check," he replied. "None of your rules apply to my land. I've already spoken with the HOA office. They told me your letter was unauthorized." Her lips tightened. "They only said that because they don't want conflict. But someone has to make sure the community stays beautiful. Your property affects our views. And your new lock is blocking access people have used for years. No one has ever had access through that gate," he said firmly. "The only person who keeps trying to use it lately is you." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she pointed toward his barn. "That truck is still sitting outside. It needs to be moved," or he held up a hand. "Stop. Stop right there. I'm done explaining this. You have no authority here, none. You must stop coming onto my land. If you continue, I will take formal action." The moment he said the word action, her expression changed. She pulled back slightly, then narrowed her eyes in suspicion. "What kind of action?" He didn't raise his voice. "Legal action." She scoffed. "You wouldn't. People who threaten legal action usually don't have the means to follow through." He almost smiled. If only she knew. "This is your final warning," he said. "Leave my property. Do not return without permission." She stared at him for a long moment before turning sharply and walking away. Her stride was stiff, her head held high, as if she believed she had won something. He watched her leave and hoped again that this was the end of it. But a few nights later, he heard a vehicle pulling up near the gate. He didn't go outside right away. Instead, he watched from the window, the porch light off. It was her car. She wasn't alone this time. Someone else sat in the passenger seat, holding a flashlight. They shined it around the gate as if inspecting it. He stepped outside calmly, making sure not to startle them. "Is there a reason you're here on my road at nearly 10 at night?" She jumped at the sound of his voice. The person with her man quickly lowered the flashlight. "We're checking the condition of the shared access point," she said, trying to sound official. "It is not shared," he replied. "It's mine, and you know it." The man beside her seemed nervous. "Maybe we should go," he muttered. But she refused. "Not until he understands that blocking this path affects the community. We've used this route for walking for years." He shook his head. "Walking past the fence line, maybe, but never through the gate. That path has always been private." She opened her mouth again, but he cut her off. "Leave now, before this becomes something bigger than it needs to be." This time, the warning worked. The man urged her to go, and eventually she threw the car into reverse and left in a cloud of dust. But the next morning, he found yet another piece of paper taped to his door. A thicker envelope this time. Inside was a printed packet, something that looked more professional. Though still not legitimate, she wasn't pretending to send HOA violations. Anymore, she was filing a formal complaint. She accused him of blocking a public easement, violating community standards, and creating environmental hazards through mismanaged land. The packet declared she would be taking legal action on behalf of the community. He exhaled slowly, then placed the papers on the kitchen table beside the earlier. Notice she wasn't backing down, she was escalating. The next few days were a blur of odd occurrences. Neighbors from the subdivision drove slowly past his driveway, some pointing, some whispering, some clearly confused. It didn't take long for him to realize she had been telling people her version of the story, that he was blocking a public path, that he refused to follow the community rules, that he was difficult. Of course, they didn't know the truth. They didn't know she had been trespassing over and over. They didn't know he had spoken to the HOA office. They didn't know the gate was on his land, not theirs. He didn't blame them. People believed the person who talked the loudest, not the one who stayed quiet. Then one afternoon, a polite knock sounded on his front door. When he opened it, an older couple stood there looking apologetic. "Sorry to bother you," the woman said. "We just wanted to ask, is everything all right? We've heard things, and we wanted to hear your side." He invited them onto the porch and explained everything calmly. Clearly, without anger, they listened closely. Nodding along, we figured something was off, the man said. "She has a way of exaggerating things." "That's one word for it," the homeowner replied. They talked for a few minutes, and when the couple left, he felt slightly better knowing not everyone believed her. But the situation kept building, like a storm gathering strength. The next major turn came when he received a certified letter in the mail. This one was real. It came with a case number. She had filed an actual lawsuit. He sat at the table holding the envelope, feeling something shift inside him. Not fear, not anger, resolve. She had decided to push this into a legal battle. But she had no idea who she was fighting because, while he had kept the truth quiet, preferring a peaceful retirement to bragging or boasting, he wasn't just some ranch owner. He was a retired attorney, a good one one who had handled more complex land disputes than this woman could imagine. He knew the law. He knew property rights. He knew exactly what evidence to gather. And he knew how these cases went once they landed in a courtroom. She didn't stand a chance. But she didn't know that. Not yet. He placed the lawsuit papers neatly on the table and poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. If she wanted a legal fight, he would give her one. A fair one, a truthful one, and one she would deeply regret starting. Because while he never went looking for conflict, he certainly knew how to finish it. The envelope sat on the kitchen table for a long moment before he finally opened it. Not because he feared what was inside, but because he wanted to approach the situation calmly. Without the irritation that had been growing over the past weeks, he carefully sliced the top open and pulled out the papers. The crisp sound of legal documents was familiar, maybe too familiar. It almost made him laugh. If the woman who filed them knew who she was dealing with, she might have thought twice. He spread the papers out in a neat row. Summons, complaint, attached exhibits. Her handwriting appeared on many of them. She had taken photos of his trailer, his truck, the brush pile, the locked gate, every petty thing she had obsessed over. She listed them all as violations. Violations of what? He wasn't sure she even knew. The complaint claimed he was a threat to the aesthetic value of the community, that he had blocked a public easement, that he had ignored multiple notifications from the HOA, and that his property posed environmental risks due to poor maintenance. He almost smiled again. None of it held weight. Not a single part, but she didn't know that. She was about to find out. He stood, walked to a cabinet near the hallway, and pulled out an old leather briefcase. It had been years since he opened it. He preferred not thinking about work anymore, but some habits never left. He placed the lawsuit papers inside, then grabbed a notebook and pen. If this woman wanted a legal fight, he would prepare for one. The next morning, he began his work the same way he used to prepare for his cases back in the city, methodically and quietly. He walked the property with his camera, taking photos from every angle: the locked gate, the fence line, the areas she had trespassed, the deep footprints near the trail. He documented everything with calm patience. He even found one of her footprint trails leading to a part of the fence she had no reason to be near. He photographed that too. Later, he opened his old laptop and drafted a motion to dismiss. He wrote with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He cited property lines, legal land records, the exact county codes the woman had misinterpreted. He didn't raise his voice or slam doors or seek revenge. He simply did what he had always done, handled things the right way. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair and reread the draft. It was clean, clear, sharp enough to cut through every one of her claims. But he wasn't done yet. In cases like this detail mattered. That afternoon, he drove to the county recorder's office. The building was small, with shelves full of maps and binders containing years of land records. He spoke politely to the clerk and explained which maps he needed. She pulled out a large, worn folder. Inside were detailed surveys of the ranch land, including the very access road the woman claimed was public. "You're the only owner of that road," the clerk said after looking at the map with him. "There's no easement on file for the subdivision. Never has been." "I figured," he replied. She shook her head lightly. "People from that HOA come in from time to time asking about boundary lines. Some think the rules follow them everywhere." He chuckled softly. "I've noticed." The clerk made him certified copies of the maps, stamped and signed. These would be useful in court. On his way out, an older man sitting near the doorway gave him a curious look. "You dealing with someone trying to push into your land?" "Something like that." The older man grunted knowingly. "Happens a lot around these parts. Folks move out from the city, think they can control everything they see. They forget ranches aren't playgrounds." He offered a friendly smile. "I'm handling it." The man tipped his hat. "Good. Don't let M walk over you." He didn't plan to. When he got home, he added the certified maps to his growing stack of documents. The folder he was building looked professional because it was. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for intimidation. It was preparation. A few days passed before the first hearing date arrived. During that time, he went about his daily routines, feeding the animals, cleaning out the barn, mending fences. On the surface, life looked calm, but the tension between him and the woman continued quietly. Every so often, he spotted her car creeping past the entrance to his property, not turning in, not getting out, just passing by slowly, as if trying to reassure herself that she still had some kind of control. One evening, he caught sight of her again, standing near the fence line just outside the subdivision path. She wasn't trespassing this time. She just stared at the ranch with narrowed eyes and a stiff posture. For a moment, he considered walking over to speak to her, but he changed his mind. Anything he said would only make her dig deeper into whatever story she had built in her head. The court would handle it, and so would the truth. The morning of the hearing, he woke early. The sky was pale blue and the air crisp. He dressed neatly but casually, not in a suit, not like he used to for work, just in clean slacks and a button-up shirt. He didn't want to intimidate anyone. He just wanted to make things clear. The courthouse was about 30 minutes away. He drove there with steady calm, not rushing. When he pulled into the parking lot, he saw her car already parked. She stood near the entrance, holding her clipboard against her chest, her chin high, acting as if she were marching into battle. When she saw him, her eyes narrowed. But she said nothing. He nodded politely and walked inside. The courtroom was small, designed for local disputes and minor cases. A few people waited on benches, some whispering softly. The woman sat down in the front row and shuffled through her stack of papers. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He stood tall and steady the way he had so many times before. The judge began with introductions. We are here today to address a civil complaint filed by the plaintiff regarding alleged violations of neighborhood standards and restricted access to an easement. Plaintiff, please step forward. The woman practically jumped to her feet and hurried to the front. She spoke with confidence, too much confidence, Your Honor. She began, the defendant has repeatedly violated the standards of our community. His property is within view of our walking paths, and the condition of his land brings down the value of our homes. Furthermore, he has locked a gate that the public has used for years, blocking access. The judge raised a hand. One moment. Is the defendant part of your HOA? She hesitated. Well, technically no. But his property is visible too. That is not what I asked, the judge said gently but firmly. Is he a member? No. The judge nodded and wrote something down. Continue, she went on, flipping through pages, presenting photos, and reading her notes. She spoke with passion, but there was no legal foundation behind any of her words. When she finished, the judge turned to him. Defendant. He stood and approached the front. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound defensive. He simply spoke clearly, Your Honor. I am the sole owner of the ranch land and the access road in question. I have here certified records from the county confirming that there is no public easement of any kind. I also have documentation showing repeated trespassing onto my property by the plaintiff. He handed the judge the folder, neatly organized. The judge flipped through the documents slowly. These are certified records? Yes, Your Honor. And this shows the plaintiff entered your property without permission? Yes, Your Honor, multiple times. I have dated photos as well. The judge continued reading. A long silence filled the room. Finally, he set the papers down and looked directly at the woman. Ma'am, you have no jurisdiction over this man's property. Your HOA has no authority beyond its own defined borders, and there is no legal basis for your claim regarding a public easement. She opened her mouth to protest, but the judge raised a hand. Additionally, this lawsuit appears to be based on misunderstandings of property law and improper attempts to enforce neighborhood rules on a non-member. This court does not take kindly to misusing legal filings for personal disputes. Her face flushed a deep red. The judge continued, I am dismissing this case with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I strongly advise you to cease all attempts to enter the defendant's property. If you continue, you may face legal consequences. The woman looked stunned. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared between the judge and him as if the world had suddenly stopped making sense. The judge gave a final nod. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel struck. It was over. He gathered his folder calmly and walked toward the exit. Behind him, he heard the woman whispering angrily to herself, papers rustling as she tried to collect them. When he stepped outside, the sunlight felt warm on his face, freeing, peaceful. But before he reached his truck, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Wait," she called. He turned slowly. She stood a few feet away, gripping her clipboard tightly, her expression somewhere between angry and confused. "You didn't tell me?" she said quietly, almost accusingly. "Tell you what?" He asked. That you know the law? That you handled this like." She frowned, searching for words. "Like someone who does this for a living," gave a small shrug. "I'm retired." "Retired from what?" she demanded. He met her eyes steadily. "Law." Her lips parted. A long moment passed. "You tricked me," she whispered. "I didn't trick you," he replied calmly. "I tried asking you to stay off my property. You didn't listen. The rest happened because you pushed it." She stared at him a moment longer before turning away. She walked toward her car stiffly, her steps uneven, as if her world had shifted in a way she didn't know how to handle. He let her go without another word. As he drove home, he felt no triumph, no anger, no need to celebrate. He simply felt relief. Relief that the tension had lifted, relief that the truth had been seen, relief that he could return to his quiet ranch and the peaceful life he had chosen. But he also knew something else. People don't like losing battles they start. He didn't think she would try anything again, but he couldn't be certain. Some people learned lessons the hard way. Others refused to learn at all. Only time would tell which kind she was. The day of the first court hearing came sooner than anyone expected. The ranch owner woke up early, not because he was nervous, but because he wanted to get the animals fed and the morning chores done before driving into town. The cool air helped clear his mind, as did the simple routine of feeding the horses and checking the fences. It grounded him. It reminded him that life could be calm and steady even when people tried to stir up trouble. He didn't put on a fancy suit. He didn't want to look like he was trying to impress anyone. He chose a clean button-up shirt, dark jeans, and boots that weren't spotless but were at least presentable. He didn't need a suit to speak the truth. Besides, he knew from years of experience that judges cared far more about facts than appearances. By the time he reached the courthouse parking lot, the morning sun had climbed high enough to warm the pavement. He took a slow breath as he stepped out of his truck. It had been a long time since he walked into a courtroom as anything other than a visitor. But the old familiarity was still there in the back of his mind. It's like a tool stored away for years but still sharp inside the courthouse. He checked in and took a seat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom. A few minutes later, he heard the sharp clicking of shoes, loud and impatient. He didn't even need to look up to know who it was. She marched down the hallway with a stack of papers in her arms and a look of confidence that didn't match the situation. She wore a bright jacket and carried the same energy she had every time she marched onto his land, as if she owned it. When she spotted him sitting calmly, her eyebrows lifted. "You're not dressed for court," she said with a tone that suggested she believed court was another one of her neighborhood meetings. He simply answered, "I'm dressed just fine." She let out a short laugh, as if she had caught him in some kind of mistake. She began adjusting her papers dramatically, making sure he saw the binder full of printouts she kept referencing. Most of it was probably the same stack of HOA rules she had sent him before. A few minutes later, the bailiff opened the doors and called everyone inside. The ranch owner stood and walked in calmly. She hurried in with the same dramatic movements as before. Once inside, he took his seat at the defendant's table. She sat at the plaintiff's table with her binder spread out like a shield. The judge entered and everyone stood. After she sat, the hearing began. The judge reviewed the paperwork quietly for a moment before looking up. There was a long pause. The judge's eyes shifted from the papers to the woman. "Before we begin," the judge said slowly, "I want to clarify something. Your homeowners association does not have jurisdiction over this man's ranch. This is already established in county records. The woman straightened in her chair. Your Honor, with all due respect, his ranch affects the appearance of our community. The HOA guidelines. The judge raised a hand calmly, but firmly. Ma'am, the HOA guidelines apply only to properties within the HOA boundaries. His land is not part of your HOA. You cannot enforce HOA rules on him. Period. She opened her mouth again, but the judge continued. Furthermore, your claim about a public easement is unsupported. According to the county map, the road he gated is on his private land. At that moment, the ranch owner could see something change in her expression. Her confidence slipped, if only a little. She flipped through her papers quickly, as if the county map might magically match what she wanted it to show. The judge then turned to the ranch owner. Sir, do you have anything you wish to present? He stood and handed the bailiff a neat folder. Inside were photographs of the trespassing incidents, time-stamped, along with copies of the land survey and the county documentation. He didn't speak right away. He waited for the judge to look through everything first. The judge nodded. This is clear and well organized. The woman scoffed loudly. He's making it look like I did something wrong. I was only doing my duty for the community. The judge looked directly at her. Entering private property without permission is not your duty, ma'am. It is trespassing. Her face turned red. She flipped another page in her binder. Even though she clearly had nothing meaningful to counter with, the judge continued reading. Then she sat back and looked at both of them. I'm dismissing this case with prejudice. This means it cannot be brought back to this court. The claims here have no legal basis. The woman gasped. But, Your Honor, the judge cut her off gently but firmly. I am also warning you that misusing the court to harass someone is a serious matter. I strongly suggest you stop contacting this man unless you have a legitimate reason. Nothing in your HOA role gives you authority over his land. The woman slumped back in her chair, stunned. The ranch owner didn't celebrate or smirk. He simply nodded, thanked the judge, and returned to his seat. The hearing ended soon after. As people filed out of the room, he felt a small sense of relief. Not joy. Not victory, just relief that the nonsense had finally reached a point where someone in authority had stepped in and put a stop to it. But he also knew this might not be the end. People who acted like she did rarely accepted being wrong, especially not publicly. When he stepped outside the courtroom, the bright hallway lights made everything feel a little unreal. He walked toward the exit, wanting nothing more than to get back home. Behind him, he heard quick footsteps. You tricked me. She snapped. He turned slowly. No one tricked you, he said calmly. You didn't tell anyone you used to be a lawyer. She said, pointing at him as if she had uncovered some secret. He shook his head. I didn't need to tell anyone. You filed a case that had no legal basis. Anyone could see that. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Anger and embarrassment fought for space on her face. He ended the conversation before she could find the right insult. The judge gave you good advice. Take it. Then he walked out of the courthouse. The drive home was long, but peaceful. The road wound through open fields and past quiet hills. The sky was bright and clear. He lowered the window slightly and let the warm air drift in. At home, he pulled up to the gate and got out to unlock it. The metal felt warm under the afternoon sun. He slid the lock open, pushed the gate aside, and drove through. Once he parked, he stepped out and listened. The ranch was silent except for the occasional rustle of wind in the grass and the faint sound of animals moving in the barn. It was the kind of silence he came here for. A silence worth protecting. But as peaceful as the ranch was, he knew things might still shift in the coming days. The HOA board hadn't been involved in the court case directly, and he suspected they would have something to say once they learned what had happened, even if they didn't. She wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. He went about his afternoon chores, letting the simple tasks calm him. The judge's words replayed in his mind not because he needed reassurance, but because the whole situation had been so unnecessary. All of it could have been avoided if she had simply respected boundaries, both legal and personal. A few hours later, as the sun began to set, he sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee. The sky glowed orange and pink over the fields. The air cooled and the first stars began to show. He had won the case, but he didn't feel triumphant. He felt steady, grounded. The ranch was his home, his retreat from the world. He had no interest in fighting or proving anything to anyone. He just wanted peace. The next morning, he found a white SUV parked just outside his gate. He recognized it immediately. His stomach didn't sink, but he did feel a quiet sigh forming. She stepped out, holding another stack of papers. He walked slowly toward the gate, keeping a calm voice. "You shouldn't be here." She lifted the papers as if they were a weapon. "The board wants to speak with you," she said sharply. He raised an eyebrow. "Do they, or do you?" She hesitated for a moment. Then she dropped her voice. "They think you embarrassed me on purpose. They want to clear the air." He crossed his arms. "Tell them they're welcome to send me a letter. A polite one. And if they want a meeting, they can schedule it properly. Not like this." She stood there for a few seconds, gripping the papers, then turned and marched back to her SUV. As she drove away, dust rose behind her tires. He watched the dust settle. For a moment, he wondered if the meeting would happen, or if the board would simply wash their hands of the situation. Either way, he was ready. The law was on his side. The land was his. And now, the court had made it clear that he had done nothing wrong. He locked the gate behind him and went back to his day, hoping just maybe that this time, the message had finally gotten through. The morning after, the white SUV left his gate. The ranch owner woke up with a clearer mind than he expected. The court case was behind him, and although the situation wasn't fully over, he finally felt the weight start to lift from his shoulders. He stepped outside and stood for a moment on the porch, letting the cool air brush against his face. The sky was pale blue, untouched by clouds. It was the kind of morning that made a person grateful for quiet spaces. He fed the animals and checked the fence lines, just like he always did. The rhythm of ranch life had a way of settling things inside him. Every gate latch, every bucket of feed, every hoof step in the dirt, each one helped bring his mind back to the present. By mid-morning, he was trimming some overgrown branches near the barn when he heard a vehicle approaching. He turned and saw a different car this time, a dark sedan. Not the bright SUV that usually signaled trouble. The car parked outside the gate. 3 people stepped out. None of them were her. He recognized 2 of them as members of the HOA board. The third was someone he didn't recognize, a middle-aged man in a simple shirt holding a folder. He walked toward the gate, keeping his movements calm. "Morning," he said. The man with the folder nodded. "Good morning. I'm here on behalf of the HOA board. We'd like to talk, if you're open to it." He studied their expressions. They looked uneasy, not confrontational. "Talking is fine," he said. "But I'm not opening the gate until I know what this is about." The man opened the folder. "We wanted to apologize." That caught him off guard. He didn't say anything, so the man continued. "We weren't aware of the court case until yesterday. When we reviewed what happened, we realized things had gone far beyond anything we would approve of." One of the board members, a woman with polite eyes and a tired smile, stepped closer. "She acted on her own. We never authorized her to enter your property, and we definitely didn't approve her filing a lawsuit." The ranch owner nodded slowly. "I figured she wasn't working under real authority." "She wasn't," the woman said. "We've had complaints about her before. She takes her volunteer role far more seriously than she should." Another board member, a tall man with glasses, spoke next. "We removed her from all HOA responsibilities last night. She will no longer represent the community in any capacity." The ranch owner breathed out, not quite relief, but something close. "I appreciate that." The man with the folder cleared his throat. "We'd also like to extend a formal apology for how she treated you and for the stress this caused. We understand your land is your land. We have no authority over it, and we should have stepped in sooner." He nodded again. "Thank you. That's all I ever wanted, for the HOA to leave my ranch alone." The man hesitated. "One more thing. We hope you won't hold this against the rest of the community. Most of us just want to live peacefully." "I have no issue with the community," he said honestly. "Just with people who don't respect boundaries?" They all nodded, relieved. The man with the folder extended a sealed envelope through the gate. This is the written apology. Signed by the board. He took it. After a few more polite words, they returned to their car and drove off. Leaving him standing at the gate with the envelope in his hand, he walked back to the porch and sat down before opening it. Inside was a simple letter, typed neatly, apologizing for what had happened. It wasn't dramatic, but it was sincere, and that was enough. He placed the letter inside his desk drawer. He didn't need to frame it or show it to anyone. It was just a reminder that sometimes people did the right thing after all. For a few days, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. The only vehicles passing the ranch were delivery trucks and neighbors heading to town. No surprise visits, no arguments, no one waving HOA papers in the air. But even as things calmed, couldn't shake the sense that something else might still happen. People didn't usually go from full steam to a dead stop overnight. Sure enough, one afternoon, as he was fixing a water trough, a familiar voice called out from the fence line, "I'm not done with this." He turned and saw her standing there on the public side of the fence. Arms crossed, eyes burning with resentment. He didn't walk toward her. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "You need to leave." "You humiliated me in court," she snapped. "You made the board think I'm the problem." "There was no need to make them think anything," he said. "Your actions spoke for themselves." She stepped closer to the fence. "I was trying to protect the neighborhood. You made me look like a fool." He shook his head. "I didn't make you do anything." For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue more. But then she seemed to realize something. She realized he wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He was simply done, and that shook her more than anger ever could. She turned and stormed off without another word. He watched her go. Hoping that would be the last time she came near his land, he had no interest in continuing any kind of conflict. He didn't need to win. He just needed his peace. The following week, a letter arrived in his mailbox. It was from the county sheriff's office. Inside was a notice confirming that she had been officially warned to stay off his property. He nodded with quiet approval. It wasn't something he requested directly. But clearly the judge's comments had made their way through the proper channels. It felt like the loose ends were beginning to tie themselves up. One calm evening, a different kind of visitor showed up, a man from down the road who lived in the HOA community. He drove an old pickup truck, dusty and well-used. When the ranch owner walked out to greet him, the man removed his hat politely. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "Not at all," the ranch owner replied. The man sighed. "Just wanted to say, not all of us are like her. Plenty of folks around here respect you. Some of us even admire how you handled everything." The ranch owner smiled slightly. "I didn't handle it perfectly. Just did what I had to do." Well, the neighbor said, "You handled it better than most would have." They talked for a while about the land, the weather, livestock, and simple things. Before leaving, the neighbor added quietly, "If she causes you any more trouble, you let me know. A few of us in the neighborhood are tired of her behavior." The ranch owner thanked him sincerely. As the neighbor drove away, he felt something warm settle in his chest. Not pride connection, understanding. Weeks passed, and slowly the situation faded into the background. The HOA kept its distance. The board stayed polite. The community waved when they drove by. And she, after that last confrontation, seemed to disappear from his daily life. It wasn't that she moved away. He still sometimes saw her car in the distance when he drove past the neighborhood. But she never came near the ranch again. Maybe the court case humbled her. Maybe the HOA removing her role hit harder than she expected. Or maybe she finally realized the truth. He wasn't someone she could push around. On a warm afternoon near the start of summer, the ranch owner sat on his porch watching the sun dip low over the fields. The horses grazed in the pasture. A gentle breeze shook the tall grass. The world felt still again in the best possible way. He thought back over everything that had happened to trespassing. The arguments, the fake fines, the lawsuit, the courthouse hearing, the apology, the warnings. It amazed him how far things had escalated because one person refused to respect a boundary. But it also showed him something else. that standing firm didn't require yelling or fighting. It just required clarity, patience, and the courage to let the truth speak for itself. He lifted his coffee cup and took a slow sip as the sky shifted colors. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause. It came quietly, settling into place once the noise faded, and now finally, the noise was gone. He looked out across his ranch, a place he had worked hard for, a place he chose for its calm, its space, its freedom. He smiled softly. This was home, and no one, not an overzealous HOA volunteer, not a stack of papers, not even a lawsuit, was ever going to take that away from him.